Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join today. And Lillian, thank you for the introduction. And I'm going to thank Nancy Margolis for making these talks part of her gallery programming, and for Lillian for carrying on that tradition. So I've spent most of my life making paintings, reading and talking about painting, and studying many different kinds of visual art. So today I thought I would share a few things that I've learned. So my hope is that you might come away today with a deeper understanding about the object we recognize to be a painting, and also learn a bit more about how I approach making my work. And I'm going to say the word painting a lot. Who I am as an artist and the perspectives that I'm going to share with you today are a combination of interactions with a lot of different people, my teachers, my colleagues at the Maine College of Art and Design, with my students, other artists, critics, art historians, writers, poets, and friends who like to discuss these kinds of things. All of the voices have inspired me and contributed to the content of this talk. Most of the things I'm going to say to you today will sound simple or obvious and have been said by many others. After spending a life doing an activity, as we know, it boils down to the most simple of things, and it's in this simplicity that we find the complexity. So the first part of this talk is going to be some general information about painting and about paintings. After that, I'm going to talk more specifically about my work and the work in the show. So here we go. Throughout history, artists and groups of artists have written manifestos that put forth different opinions and attitudes about approaches to painting and visual art. So I thought I would start by showing you a few excerpts from 3 manifestos written about painting. This first example is penned by a well-known minimalist, Ad Reinhardt. It was published around 1953. He says, no texture, no brushwork, no calligraphy, no sketching or drawing, no forms, no design, no colors, no light, no space, no time, no size, no scale, no movement, no object, no subject, no matter, no symbols, images, or signs. This declaration strips painting down to the bare bones from being anything other than itself. And when I show this to students, they get really mad. It defines the parameters, or as Michael Fried says, the object's identity is a painting, or what you see is what you see, as Donald Judd and Frank Stella say. Reinhardt's manifesto and minimalism's project rejects traditional notions of painting and viewing paintings. This next text defines an international movement called Stuckism. The Stuckist Manifesto, written by Billy Childish and Charles Thompson in 1999 in England, championed painting as a medium of self-discovery, and particularly figurative narrative painting. This text is a complete rejection of the minimalist position, and I edited this second manifesto just down to 3 points from 20. Number 7, it is the Stuckist's duty to explore his or her neurosis and innocence through the making of paintings and displaying them in public, thereby enriching society by giving shared form to individual experience and an individual form to shared experience. Number 11, postmodernism, in its adolescent attempt to ape the clever and witty in modern art, has shown itself to be lost in a cul-de-sac of idiocy. Number 16, the Stuckist champion process over cleverness, realism over abstraction, content over void, humor over wittiness, and painting over smugness. So this manifesto is a reaction to the market's reception to conceptual art and counter to Ad Reinhardt's position, because the Stuckist's privilege handmade, illusion, emotion, autobiography, the use of the figure, representation, and narrative. And this last example is by Molly Zuckerman Hartung, a contemporary painter. This one is more of a personal manifesto than one that defines an art movement, and only 7 points from 95 of her 95 theses on painting. Number 3, becoming a painter is my way of deciphering the codes of visual information and experience that structure capitalism in our time. Number 12, I believe in painting as a meaningful act. Number 13, I believe in painting as a desperate, stupid, time-wasting act involving huge, crippling ambition and necessary and near constant failure. This too is meaningful. Number 56, in speech, one cannot take something back. 57, in writing, one changes one's mind privately and presents a reasoned argument publicly. Number 58, in painting, the difference is that the accumulated evidence of changing one's mind is allowed to remain as a buildup, as density or sedimentation. And my colleagues and I often talk about painting as an object of doubt. And number 87, painting is the language of form and space that reminds me that I am made of the same stuff as the world. So I've spent most of my life making paintings. What have I learned? Subject matter is only a small part of experiencing a painting. A painting is a flat plane, or as Saul Steinberg writes about it, it's like a desk where things land and overlap. There is no subject matter other than that, kind of like what Ad Reinhardt says. A painting is a flat plane with lines and shapes and colors on it. Sometimes the shapes hold their shapeness, and sometimes the shapes combine to represent something. Steinberg says the flatbed picture plane makes its symbolic allusion to hard surfaces, such as tabletops, studio floors, charts, bulletin boards, any receptor surface on which objects are scattered, on which data is entered, on which information may be received, printed, impressed, whether coherently or in confusion. All paintings are an abstraction. One of the conditions of abstraction is an awareness that you're looking at an object and at the process of making the object and the materials the object is made with. You are not reading a book or marveling at how real the thing looks. One reads subject matter. Reading is not seeing. Reading happens in the mind, seeing happens in the body. Sometimes one looks at a picture, sometimes one sees a painting. These are two different ways of looking and two different types of experiences. One way puts you in touch with the subject matter and the artist who is observing the world to try to make sense of it all. And the other way of looking puts you in touch with the fact that this is an abstract translation of the painter's observation, a flat plane made of colored shapes. And here's a good visual explanation of what I just said. In the first painting, we see subject matter. The second, we see abstraction. And the third, the flat plane. The subject matter of a painting or any artwork is very important, and it is only one entry point. This particular note cannot be stressed enough in the viewing, teaching, and understanding of the field of art. Paintings are objects that are made with materials. Paint is dirt mixed with oil or some kind of binder. Brushes are made of hair, real and synthetic. Supports can choose a chosen fabric like canvas made of cotton or panel or wood panel or paper, or you can paint directly on walls or rocks as the cave painters did. The choice of the surface that one puts paint on holds meaning, as does the way the paint is applied. Is it thick or thin, gestural or done with the wrist? The way someone uses materials embeds content in the work. The medium is the message. And this is Glenn Brown. I just saw his work in New York, and he's using paint differently now. It's more rendered and more refined. In his critical essay about content, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, Thomas McEvely writes, traditional art materials, industrial materials, esoteric high-tech materials carry content quite as much as form. They are judgment pronouncements that the art viewer picks up automatically without necessarily even thinking of them as content. They're statements of affiliation to or alienation from certain areas of cultural tradition. So the upshot here is using paint aligns the artist with a traditional, ordinary material. When you look at a painting, this alone tells you something about the meaning of the work. Here's Bernard Fries's studio. His paintings are gestures that are done in one movement using a predetermined system. He does not rely on retouching. The mark is made in one move. He spends time crafting tools, making the paint perfect, the perfect consistency. So either he or an assistant can come to the canvas and make an action in one long breath. Here's an example of a frieze work on the left alongside another painter, Andrea Bellag, who uses big swooping brushstrokes that make us aware of the fluidity of the paint and the action of applying it. For the painter, the art materials and the building of the thing is of primary interest. Across a career, artists use paint in different ways, and an artist's material investigations can change radically over time. So this is Joan Brown's work. On the left, she was influenced by the abstract expressionists at the time. The paint is applied with very thick and plainer, and on the right, towards the end of her career, it's applied very thin and flat and plainer. And here's the work of Philip Brew, my dear colleague, who uses ink, which requires an embrace of directness because you can't erase, and oil, which can be worked forever. Brew's ideas about control and labor come across in his use of material. And Jerry Saltz says it this way: when you look at art, make subject matter the first thing you see, and then make it the first thing you stop seeing. Look through the subject matter and start seeing into the art. Find what needs are being expressed or hidden there, and how thought and emotion is embedded in material. A painting is a perceptual experience. A painting gets us to see. It's an object that activates our sense of sight. Just like going to a restaurant activates our sense of taste, or turning to the sounds around us activates our sense of hearing. We see in layers. The first layer is what's in front of us, a focal point, a face, a plate of food, a vase of flowers. Mostly we don't go beyond that layer. When we do, multiple levels of activity unfold. There's activity going on behind the thing we choose to focus on. A room, a landscape, people passing by, cars moving. Then there's the light condition that is ever changing. The sun is moving across the sky, day is turning into night, weather patterns are happening. There's an interlocking visual density going on surrounding everything we choose to look at or compose on a canvas. Figure ground is a term artists use to describe an expansive way of seeing. Noticing things in front of us, on the periphery, in the background, in the middle ground, above and below, near and far, at the edges, past the edges. Mostly we don't see like this though. If we notice all the things going on around us equally, it puts us in touch with our surroundings in a different way. It is a way of activating sensory experience. Paintings do this. Looking at a painting is optical indulgence, optical decadence. The sense of sight is heightened. A painting builds an understanding of different cultures. Paintings function in many different ways. Paintings and all artworks are cultural signifiers. A painting is a reflection of a society. It's a way to record information about a culture's history, politics, religious, and spiritual story. For some communities, it's a communal activity. It's a document of a given society's collective memory, and it's an object that builds an understanding of diverse ways of being and also shows our commonality. If any of you have seen a Tibetan sand painting being made, you know it's very labor intensive and physically demanding, and it involves more than one person. All details are exacting, and then it gets blown apart, emphasizing the ephemeral and demonstrating that perfection and control are illusion. A painting's function in Aboriginal culture is to operate as a link between past, present, and future. Paintings are a way of sharing information, sometimes showing locations of food and water, or describing the stories, ceremonies, and beliefs, explaining how land and life came into being. And then there's body painting. Body painting is a practice in different indigenous cultures related to spiritual matters. The specific designs and motifs used by the Aboriginals on the left have strict rules of application that depict family groups, social positions, tribe affiliation, or precise ancestry. In India, on the right, there's a bridal ceremony which involves applying mehendi on the hands and the feet of the bride and groom. Because weddings are stressful and stress can cause headaches or fevers, mehendi is applied on the hands and feet, which house nerve endings. This cools the body and keeps the nerves from becoming tense. Painting here has a medical application. Paintings, all artworks, are cultural signifiers. Paintings are places to wander. In The Observer Effect, Barry Schwabsky writes about the artist Tal R., who says, "You try to create a painting where the viewer can wander around. I love this because painting is a flat plane in which one can enter and wander in. Wandering is an action that involves not having to figure anything out. The mind can relax." Some paintings are places to wander and possibly be rejuvenated. And in the making, the artist wanders around as much as the viewer. Paintings are places to wander through different types of time, through historic time. Painting is a form of communication that has been going on for 45,000 years. This fact contributes to every single painting that you look at. Murals and graffiti have been going on for 45,000 years. Paintings are places to wander through metaphysical, spiritual space and or eternal time. And through actual time. Painting has actual time, the time it takes to make it. This point is related to craft, to the making of the thing. And through nonlinear time. When one chooses to really enter a painting, one encounters time that does not have to be rational, reasoned, or linear. Paintings are places that have a reality of their own for the maker and the viewer. This is painting's power. They pull us in and take us somewhere else. The edge of the painting defines a space. In an essay titled "The Trouble with Painting" in a catalog called "Painting at the Edge of the World," Douglas Fogel, who curated the show, writes, "Where does the edge of the canvas end and the world begin?" These paintings by Simpiwe Nedzub emphasize the fact that a painting is an object fragment, excerpted out of time and space. The writers and artists and theorists of perspective of the Italian Renaissance suggested a system of painting could provide a window on the world, a thing that you could go into. And then Donald Judd reversed that idea by making a painting a specific object that enters our space, emphasizing the architectural nature of the thing. The edge of the painting also defines a space where changing systems of values are made visible. Here we see an image of segregation with this child being flanked on either side by male protectors. The image bleeds off the edge to enter our physical space, to include us and to implicate us. The edge of a painting is a space between nature and culture. And a painting emphasizes the edge of infinity. It is both a beginning and an end. A painting is an object that transfers touch. In a post-studio, post-disciplinary, post-human, media-saturated landscape, a painting is an object that holds and conveys human touch from one person to the next. In this way, the work acts on the nervous system and the emotional system rather than the mind. This causes contact and connection between maker and viewer. Here are two paintings, one on the left by Brian David Downs and one on the right by Adolfo Wolfi. Their touch is apparent here. Both are engaged in filling up all the empty space, a concept in the visual arts called horror vacui, or the need to fill empty spaces, reflecting Aristotle's idea that nature abhors an empty space. The thickness of a material causes a viewer to want to reach out and touch the painting. The haptic quality of this inanimate object is palpable. The painting reaches out and asks to be touched. If one enters a painting, one can feel a physical sensation as if the air is moving by or the fog is evaporating. A painting is an object that functions as a decoration and a souvenir. I did a Google search about the history and function of souvenirs and found myself on Christie's auction site, reading an article that said, the humble holiday souvenir can be a treasured possession, making happy memories of bygone travels. A snow globe from Switzerland, pebbles from the beach, Leonardo's Mona Lisa on a fridge magnet. All say, I was there, making sense of our fragmented experiences and helping us to write our autobiographies. The souvenir's history is an ancient one, dating back to medieval times. Souvenirs are documentation and a memory aid. This project done by Cynthia Daigle, this is a project done by Cynthia Daigle. She decided to do this project because she realized she could name 100 men who roamed the country to create the works that depict and defined America, yet she couldn't name one such woman. So she took a year to explore America. She traveled over 30,000 miles, chronicling her view every 25 miles. This road trip resulted in 360 paintings. This piece was not originally designed to operate as a souvenir, but I think it does. I think it is an overlaying idea in the piece. They're of similar scale to a postcard. Each time she or others who have been to those places looks at one of those paintings, they act as a physical memory of a time and a place. And in regard to painting as decoration, in 2005, Helen Molesworth curated a show at the Weckner Center called Landscape Confection. In the catalog for the exhibition, she writes, the tension between serious, autonomous, and avant-garde painting and decorative painting destined to reside above the sofa played out repeatedly throughout the 20th century. Painting vacillated between Matisse's desire to make art to be looked at from the relaxing venue of a bourgeois armchair and Marcel Duchamp's desire to place art in the service of the mind. She continues to say, what is curious is a recent spate of painting at the beginning of the 21st century, which embraces the decorative full on. Contemporary artists do not find the pursuit of serious painting and the decorative, the artificial, and ornament to hold any sense of threat. And an example of an art historical movement that champions decoration and the decorative, the 1970s pattern and decoration movement was a response to minimal art's reduction and the idea orientation of conceptual art and the fashionable appeal of pop art. The decorative, decoration, the souvenir are all approaches that an artist can take. The meaning of such a choice depends on the intention of the maker. A few more here. A painting is an object of agitation. Paintings make social and political discourse visible. Graffiti is a good example of this. Paintings make history visible. A painting is an object that makes injustice visible. Identity politics visible. Oppression visible. A painting is an object that makes democracy visible. Peace and freedom visible. And a painting is an object that makes the sublime forces greater than we are visible. In the first half of the 19th century, the Romantic painters made work that turned away from the violence of war and industrialization to create images that might be counter to harsher realities by emphasizing emotion, the awe of nature, and the sublime, pointing to forces greater than humans. Given the political climate the United States and the world is in right now, I often think about how painting functions and contributes to social discourse. For me, painting is an activity that builds the world as much as it reflects back what's happening at any given point in history. And it's the building part that really interests me. By building, I mean making an image or object that might imagine and define a better world. The intimists like Bonnard did this in the latter part of the 19th century. This group of artists chose to depict the mundane, quiet, and comfort of the domestic spaces that are overlooked during times when our attentions are turned to things like war or fundamentalist politics. I am a part of a lineage of artists who think craft and beauty might help build a future world. Aesthetics invisibly work on the nervous system and contribute to the world without adding to the noise. And there is a lot of this painting being championed like this right now. Painting that wants to imagine a kinder and gentler world. Paintings are also a commodity. I got this image from an article titled Christie's $1 Billion Week. A person off the street cannot walk into a blue chip art gallery and buy a painting. The buyer has to be vetted. Painting is a commodity that has its own asset class. It's an investment that can be sold at a later date for a large profit, or it can be a tax write-off. A painting is a luxury item and a status symbol, and power politics are involved in deciding that one artist's work holds more value than another. A painting can transform one's surroundings and psychological state. Paintings are architectural objects. They activate architectural space. They are windows and portals to other views. They are escape routes. When placed on a white wall in a private or public building, they activate a space like a rock thrown in a pond. They ripple. Eliza Neisenbaum's painting of the workers in the London Underground is a public artwork that if one notices it as they're walking to catch a train, it slightly shifts one's psychic space during a routine activity. Paintings are found in places like hospitals, airports, hotels, public buildings. If we notice this, really notice this, paintings take on a different meaning. They are a decoration and also in some cases a way to potentially escape from the difficulties of where you are. Landscape paintings emphasize the fact that walls separate us from nature. Hanging pictures of the out of doors on walls creates a vista that connects one to the natural world and expands interior space. Buildings are huge available flat plains. Murals interact with the space to alter the aesthetics or voice a political message. Murals are a way to talk publicly and loudly, turning bad neighborhoods into open air art galleries. And this last note, before I tell you a bit about my work and the work of the show, although everything I'm saying here really is about my work. Making a painting teaches us that everything is an interaction. In a recent talk I listened to by Carlo Rovelli, an Italian theoretical physicist, he spoke about the scientific understanding that all of reality is an interaction. He says we understand the world better in terms of interaction between things. We understand biology in terms of evolution. We understand that one animal is called an antelope because there is another animal called a lion, and the lion because there is an antelope. We do not understand them in isolation. We understand the world in terms of interaction between things. Painting is an enactment of this. A painting is a sequence of decision and events that adds up to become something. Making a painting is a sum of actions and interactions. It's an evolution. And as a discipline and field of study, We're able to define the qualities of the activity and the object because we see them in relation to sculpture or photography or ceramics or video. We understand painting in relation to other modes of cultural production. Another way to look at this idea is through the study of color. Color is relative. Joseph Alber's whole project was about this. Here on the cover of his small book, The Interaction of Color, we see these two squares, one here, I don't know if you can see my thing there, my pointer, and one here, those two squares on the field on either side, left and right. We see these two brownish orange squares. Both of these squares are the same color. So I'm going to say that again. Both of these squares are the same color, but they are altered because of the ground they're placed on. One color looks like two. The lesson: color cannot be seen in isolation. It can only be understood in relation to what surrounds it. And here's a completely different type of interaction: a socially engaged painter. The painting's function is to be a catalyst for human interaction, which affects the person painting, the person being painted, and the surrounding people watching. Painting is performative here, a performative participatory activity with canvas as the center of the encounter. So these are only a few of the observations. I could go on like making manifesto points probably all day. Editing was tough. There's more I want to say about imagination, about painting as a domestic activity, about the stability of symmetry. But time's running out here, so I'm going to talk about my work specifically now. So as this body of work evolved, I wanted to embed the compositions with before the taking of toast and tea. As this body of work evolved, I wanted to embed the compositions with two kinds of time occurring simultaneously: a peripheral sense of anticipation for the next action to happen, alongside the experience of timelessness, which often only exists in split seconds. The title of the show is referenced from T.S. Eliot's poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. He conjures a scene in this stanza of the poem where time is both inescapable and limitless. His words make us aware of an intersection where conscious time and unconscious time meet. And then Michelle Grabner, who so generously wrote an essay for this catalog, she says it this way: it is rootedness, the foundations to place, to identity, and to time that Spaien seeks to convey in her observed and imaginary compositions. As literary critic Christy Walpole wrote, in the Western imagination, transcendence is predicated on rootedness. Please read this great essay. It was an honor to have her write it. If you have a chance, on Nancy Margolis's website or buy the catalog. So now we're going to look at some paintings. So I paint. So on the left, you'll see my work, and on the right, you'll see some source work, some of the sources that I take the work from. I paint from both imagination and via osmosis, meaning I see, feel, and experience my surroundings, and then translate that spatial situation from bodily memory and photos, rather than being a painter who works on site. My geographic location and the landscape I ski around me have been persistent subjects in my work really since graduate school. I work more from imagination and less from observation, so that the impossibility of translating nature might become more possible. These works here are not from the Nancy Margolis show, but from other periods of time. So as you see, I love repetition and pattern. I want my paintings to have an optical decadence, one that's both challenging and also pleasurable. Making the same marks over and over again is an action that literally depicts an intimacy with process and with time and with the act of painting. Repetition is a performative operation. Each time I repeat a mark, I try to make it better than the last or equal to the last. And sometimes I think from like a psychological angle that these attempts to achieve perfection might actually be a way of controlling anxiety or an impulse to control mortality. And this is a whole other topic. Childhood activities are an indicator of future adult activities. What we did as kids inevitably translates to what we do as adults. I got my first paint by number set when I was a kid. And I took up embroidery in high school after watching my mom work on her crewel projects. I embroidered birds on the back of jean jackets. And I loved watching Disney movies like Fantasia and Snow White. And also Hayao Miyazaki's animated movies Spirited Away and Totoro with my daughter when she was young. Don't you love those? When so embroidery and paint by number and animation highlighted for me that painting was a bunch of colored shapes next to each other. So I basically have spent, I don't know, 50 years moving shapes of colors around. In graduate school, I was introduced to Nicholas Africano. Seeing his work, small figures on a large ground was a game changer for me. The figures were miniaturized and caused emotion in me. The miniaturization created a potency. Scale in the miniature has been part of my thinking about painting since grad school. I learned that perception, space, and time are altered when the proportions aren't quite right or when the scale is almost life-size but not quite. I think paintings are like bonsai. They're miniaturized versions of life. The act of reduction creates a potent kind of compression. When I see a bonsai, once I get past, how did they do this? My body feels like it starts to shrink down. My physical body wants to be in accord with the way I understand the world to be. Trees are usually larger than I am. Same kind of thing happens when I encounter a dollhouse. My body wants to shrink down and enter. I call it, it's like the Alice in Wonderland effect. I want my paintings to make the viewer want to shrink down and go there. So these last few images are going to show you how I make a painting, a little bit, how I make a painting. I start each painting with geometry, dividing up the picture plane into segments. So the first move I make is to create a space for something to happen in. I think about time of day, which is really a question about color, what color I want to use, or whether the painting might have a light or a dark palette. Then I consider what symbol or object I want to paint, like a ferry boat or a lighthouse or a chair or flowers. And then I work with the composition. So on the left was the initial composition, and I did not like that. And so the right is more of where the painting is now, with those beams of light dispersed in that way. If I'm working on a show, I aim to create a collection that visually holds together. Although as I work towards my next show, I'm starting to question this approach. I'm asking the question, what if I make a collection of work that does not hold together? What would it be like to walk into a room of paintings that are all different? How do I stretch the parameters of what I have done? So lastly, I'm going to show you a sequence of iPad drawings. And they're going to show you a bit about how I approached making a work. My work evolves with no plan in mind ever, really. And it does not progress in a linear fashion. I make a lot of changes. I want to find an image, or I want the image really to find me. really occasionally I get the composition right on the first try, and I call these paintings visitations. As you look at these sequences, try to focus on one or two places so you can see how they, so you can watch my decision-making change. So here's a start. So again, you'll see iPad. So I take the start and I put it into the iPad and I draw. So here's the start. And then I'm thinking like, should I make the mullions look like a grid? Or should I make them look like that? And should I put a pattern on the fabric? And then should I do that to the sky? Or should I do that to the sky? Or should I do that to the sky and change the color of the fabric on the chair? Or now it's getting darker. Should I do that? And I enclose the windows a little bit more and I put birds outside. Or should I make it night? So this is coming to the end of the painting. Notice the orange cushions on the chair. The focal point was too much for me. So I wanted to flip that. And that's where it ends with. This next one is a little more radical. So this is the way the painting starts now. It's an interior with an exterior view on the stone patio. I change the color of the sky. And then I completely take the interior out. I wanted to kind of keep the stone patio, so that's kind of what I hung on to. And then I didn't want to do that anymore. So I took that out totally. And then I decided to, you'll see this one right here is sort of perpendicular or parallel to the picture plane. I turned it so the room, you could see a corner. And the sky is changing. And then here we have kind of the end result. So that's where it started from. So all of this to say, this is one of my favorite artists, Jonathan Borofsky. I often talk about core values with my students. I believe our core values are the content of the work we produce. In other words, all the decisions one makes in an artwork, the subject matter, the formal aesthetic concerns, the technique, the value, the material choices, are visual manifestations of our strongest, deepest values. So simplicity for me and routine are core values of mine that are apparent in the way I make my work and in my choice of subject matter. The painting is the way I understand more about myself and my interactions with the world. For me, painting is a spiritual, domestic, and intellectual act, and the painting is the manifesto. So there you have it, 42 minutes or so. And I know there's not too much time with questions, but I'm glad to answer questions. I am glad to answer questions, and I'm going to stop my screen share so that I can see you. I haven't seen you. Yeah, hi. I know. Hello. I can see you. Hi.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Gail. We do have.
Thank you, Gail.
Yeah, that was
really good.
Thank you.
Oh my God.
All right, we have a little bit of time left, so I'm going to squeeze in a few questions. Let me see. Okay, Corinne asks, it's fascinating to see this process. Do you ever find any of those mid-process sketches becoming their own paintings?
Hi, Corinne. Absolutely. And yes, I probably make 1,000 paintings during the course of some of the work, not all, but some of them, but I probably make 1,000 paintings. And actually that's a thing that's kind of up for me. I just went and saw Alex Katz's show at the Guggenheim, and boy, you know, he doesn't mess about. He just gets in and he gets out. And I don't. I'm kind of fussing and moving and shifting, and I do the same thing in my real life. So yes, and actually I do try to make myself stop along the way and say, is this done now? But there's something that compels me to keep going. And honestly, it's very hard to articulate what that is. There's an artist named Enrique Martinez Celaya who's got these time-lapse videos. You watch him do the same thing, and there's just a moment where there's some moment where the painting becomes more honest or something. It's like it's not too self-conscious. And I look for that moment, and sometimes I get it and sometimes I don't.
Perfect. Thank you. This one is from Gabe. You sort of touched on this towards the end, but maybe we can spend a little more time talking about it. He says, I am always in awe of your painting's color harmonies. How do you go about making your color selections? At what point in your process do you define your palette?
Boy, that's a good question. I have colleagues that spend hours mixing paint and putting them in syringes, actually, to keep the color good. And so when I start, let's see, so how do I go make, well, I think some of it's based on the complete body of work. I always work on a group of paintings all at once. And so I kind of make the color selection based on what's happening. Like if I have 8 paintings, I don't want them all to be white. I want them to have some difference. And there's some kind of balance, color balancing that happens in deciding when I look around the room of the work. There's some kind of balance that I have to have with the color. And so also, I don't mix on I mix as I go. And so some of it is a question of like habitual ways of mixing. We all have our habits, our go-tos. And then the question of, okay, you never use violet, you better use violet right now because you don't usually like it. So to try to get myself out of the habit of, out of my own habits, but I lean towards like a red-green thing that I try to get rid of. And I also, one other thing, so it also has to do about the contrast. It's really hard for me to get the contrast right. I tend to want to make a painting that has very low contrast, but I'm never satisfied with that. So the color mixing is also based on thinking about how much contrast I want to have in the work, and that the illumination, and that there's an illumination, not like a spotlight on the painting, that the illumination comes from within the work, not imposed on it.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes sense. This next one is from your colleague, Philip. He says, this is a wonderful and profound talk, an entire curriculum in painting. Thank you, Gail. My question is about the show's title. In reading T.S. Eliot's poem, so many of the lines resonate with the ideas you talk about. So I am wondering why that particular line?
Thanks, Philip. Well, I think partially because I really do think of my painting as a domestic activity. I mean, I guess if I was going to say one thing, that's what I'd say. I paint in the later part of the day. I listen to shows or the radio. It's kind of like quilting. I actually think of painting like I'm making a quilt. And so that line before the taking of a toast and tea is so domestic. And it also has built into that sense of anticipation, which is kind of what I wanted to embed in some of the work, like this sense of an action about to happen or just happen. And so yeah, that's how I will answer that at the moment. And then we can discuss it later.
Perfect. Thank you. This next one is from Nancy, and she asks, how much has digital iteration changed your work or your process? I assume when you started painting, you wanted to try things out that had to be done painting wise. So can you talk about this, how the digital platforms have shifted your process or influenced?
Yeah, a lot. And actually, I often think about how the digital screen, in terms of color and light have shown up in the work, and also how having a virtual gallery makes me make the painting want to look more digital.
Hmm.
Also, there's some effects that I don't know how to use Photoshop really. My skills with the digital drawing are very remedial. I don't really care to learn all of that. But sometimes when I use the clone stamp or I'm doing things, I often think like, oh, I want to make a painting that looks like that. But the digital iteration thing, it just is faster. I don't draw on paper. I never sketched. I work it all out on the canvas. So because of the speed and the fact that I can get rid of it quickly, the speed of it, it has made it a really excellent tool for me to use.
Perfect. Thank you. This next one is from Jim. He says, nice talk, Gail. There is a sense of artificial atmosphere in your paintings, possibly connected to Disney movies. Do you see a connection to time?
Hi, I'm very happy. Thank you for coming. It's very nice to see you, even on a screen. So I see the world in sort of an animated way. I have since I was young. In those movies, the way that they break down the color and the shape and they simplify a figure really informed me about how I wanted my work to look. In terms of time, well, it's like imaginary time. It's like Birch chalk drawings in Mary Poppins where you can go in there. It's a space. And so when you ask, do I see a connection to time? I guess maybe in a sense I see my paintings as a way to enter into time, which also and also space. Now, having said that, that physicist I was listening to talks about the time is totally an illusion. Like we could get really deep into the metaphysics of like that, what time is. So, I'm kind of aware on a really metaphysical level about a painting operating like that also, right? That it's an illusion of time. It's talking about the illusion of time as much as the physicist understands that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know if I got that, but.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. This one is from Meredith. She said, this talk is excellent. Will you be offering classes and/or lectures after retiring from your current academic affiliation?
Thank you, Meredith. I don't know, come to another talk. That's probably it at this point, all of the stuff that's in this talk, and I felt like I was writing a book in a lot of ways. It was a cool opportunity to do this. It's a compilation of what I think about painting and my teaching. It's kind of both. So you got the abbreviated version of 30 years. I just got to say that. Thank you for asking, though.
Yes, I see this one. Can you give a mention of your decisions about flattening of space and articulated dimensional qualities?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I want someone to look at my work for a long time. Like, I want them to look at it. So using flattened space along with rendered volume and pattern causes the viewer to sort of try to figure out what they're looking at. So it's the phrase optical decadence, or there was another something. Like it's like painting is eye candy. So, it also, all the stuff I said at the beginning of the talk is embedded in my work, maybe except for that I'm not in a blue chip art gallery. My paintings have not reached the level of a commodity like that yet, or ever, maybe, which is fine with me. So I want somebody to look a long time, and also that flattening is more decorative. Like I embrace the decorative. I like it. I like that. I'm like in Matisse's camp there. And so the flattening of space and the rendered dimension makes a viewer look a long time.
Mhm.
So thank you everybody for coming. It was awesome to see you all here, and you can certainly email me if you have another questions.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Gail. I loved hearing that. That was amazing.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming and wishing you a wonderful weekend.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.